Hey everyone. In this episode of Think on This with MHA Lakeshore, I spoke with Trisha Erpelding, who is the Director of Education and Advocacy at MHA Lakeshore and also my coworker. Trisha has had a passion for working with children and youth for as long as she can remember. She graduated with a degree of social work from UW-Whitewater in 2008 and decided to continue her education by pursuing a master's degree, which she earned in 2016. As the Director of Education and Advocacy, Trisha is able to pursue her dream with working with youth by educating students in Sheboygan County about a variety of mental health topics, including awareness, prevention, and stigma elimination. As a mindful classroom instructor, Trisha is able to share mindfulness with students in our area, teaching them valuable skills in order to stay focused, calm, self-regulate, and boost self-esteem. Trisha lives with her husband in the Sheboygan area and their son, Hayden, daughter, Scarlett, and their dog, Maddy. I chose to speak with Trisha because she is so incredibly knowledgeable and has so many great insights into education as well as the landscape around mental health. I had a lot of fun talking with her, and I hope you all enjoy our conversation. Welcome back to the Think on This podcast with Mental Health America Lakeshore. I'm your host, Keegan Reines. Mental Health America Lakeshore is a nonprofit resource and referral agency based in eastern Wisconsin. We are dedicated to helping individuals access mental health services and providing community education around mental health topics. The Think on This podcast is a broad look at the world of mental health in the hopes that through the stories of those who engage in mental health each day, we can provide much-needed clarity to this subject. Some of these conversations may be difficult for listeners due to the nature of these topics. If you are ever feeling overwhelmed, I invite you to pause the conversation and take care of yourself. There is no need to power through this podcast, as you can always come back to it later. Please be aware that nothing said here consists of medical advice, and if you are struggling with a mental illness, reach out to the appropriate professional. Lastly, I want to take the time to thank you for listening to this podcast. Our vision is that through these conversations, we can create mentally healthy communities where all individuals thrive. By listening, you are a part of that mission. Thank you so much, Trisha, for being here. And I want to quickly apologize to anybody listening at home. We do have some background noise coming and going sporadically, just from some construction that is going on in downtown Sheboygan. So we'll work with what we have, and please do not berate me for having any construction noise. I can't control it. So could you just give me a little background on you, Trisha, and kind of what brought you to MHA Lakeshore?
Yeah, so I've known since I was young that I wanted to work in schools, and I wanted to work with kids in some capacity. In the job that I had before I was at MHA, I worked with kids and young adults with autism, and I loved it, but I wanted to be doing something a little bit more with a mental health focus, school focus, things like that. And I have my master's in social work from UW-M, and I originally had planned on being a school social worker. And I ended up not accepting a job that I was offered in a school district, freaking my mom out a little bit, but I ended up moving back to Sheboygan, working with kids with autism for a while. And then I noticed on Facebook one day, I had liked MHA on Facebook a while before, and I noticed that they had posted a job for a youth educator, and I'm reading through the description, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect job for me. I get to work in schools. I get to help people with mental health concerns. I get to provide people with resources and support. And it's kind of everything that I wanted to do. So I applied, and luckily I got it. And it slowly started to shift from what the role used to be, where we used to kind of go in and do kind of more like sit and gets, like 1 hour quick brief sessions of different mental health topics, to starting to really shift into more kind of long-term programming and things that were a little bit more intensive, more informative than what we had been doing in the past. So that switched into an education coordinator role. And then a couple of years ago, I was, then my title changed again to the Director of Education and Advocacy as our education program continued to grow. So I love what I do, and I'm just so thankful to be here.
And to give everybody a little background, my role is the education coordinator. So I work very closely with Trisha in many of the aspects of what MHA does and what we do for education. So a lot of these things we'll be talking about, I have kind of already an understanding. So I'm going to try to clarify it for everybody. And I'm kind of wondering, how did mindfulness get into this aspect? Mindfulness is something that we do a lot with at MHA, and I'm kind of actually unsure myself and how that got started here.
So right before I came on board, I started at MHA in the summer of 2016. And there had been some community conversations and different things that had happened where people were starting to become more interested in mindfulness in the community. And there were some things that were offered in the community even before my time at MHA. And our previous executive director really wanted to start infusing some of those mindfulness practices into the work that we were doing, because there was so much evidence that was coming out that mindfulness was effective. It was useful in helping people to cope with adversity and different things that they had going on in their lives. So she had done some research looking into different curricula and things that could be utilized within schools and within, everyday adult life. And we started to work with an organization called Growing Minds, and they're based out of Milwaukee. They came up here, did a community session, kind of an intro to mindfulness thing. And then the very first thing that I actually did when I was onboarded at MHA was I went down to Milwaukee for training. So my first week of work was actually getting trained by Growing Minds in Milwaukee and learning the curriculum and being able to bring it back up into schools. And then that fall of 2016 is when we started implementing it in the schools. So we had at that time 3 different sessions. We had fall and winter and spring. We were in, I want to say, like 40 classrooms that first year. It was very overwhelming. So we decided to pare it down as we started the fall of 2017. But yeah, we really hit the ground running. Those first schools that signed on really, had some of those conversations with our previous executive director, and we were able to go in and work with those schools. But really, from the start of the mindfulness program to now, we have not had to do a lot of marketing or anything. Like, it's just been, schools have seen it happen. They've heard about it. They have colleagues who've been like, oh my gosh, yeah, we had MHA come in. You should have them come in. And we've now been in, I want to say it's close to like 250 classrooms. And we've really just loved that time with students. So it really has been kind of a slow process as we implement it, as we make it better, as we start to kind of formulate our own curricula that we love, because we know that there were, from all the different curricula that are out there, there are kind of some pieces missing. So that then turned into the Mindful Classroom Initiative, the Mindful Educator Series, the Student Series, and it's really a huge piece of our education programming now.
We'll come back to this mindfulness topic because there's so much there and so much that we love about mindfulness and the work that we do. But could you give me some background in some of the other work that you do day to day, not just with mindfulness, but other education aspects, as well as you are also the director of advocacy here. And what does that look like?
Yes. So I have a lot of different hats that I wear here at MHA. I am in my role as the director of education and advocacy. Obviously, that's split up into the 2 different parts. So education is really looking at what are we doing in the schools? What are we doing in the community? We offer different kind of general community events, suicide prevention trainings, intro to mindfulness trainings, general mental health trainings. And then we offer things for workplaces as well. So a big part of what I do is also working with different employers in the community to come in and provide different lunch and learns or mental health sessions or different things that employees can attend and utilize in order to build their own knowledge about mental health. And then with the advocacy piece, a lot of that is just staying up to date on what is happening at a local level, a state level, a national level, as far as mental health laws. So looking at mental health parity, are we able to get insurance reimbursement for mental health concerns at the same rate that we would for physical health concerns? Are there good mental health laws on the books protecting people who have mental illness? Are there different organizations and different ways that people can get involved to contact their legislators and talk to people about making sure that there's good policy on the books? So doing things like that. Sometimes it's as simple as sending an email to someone. Sometimes we're scheduling a meeting with a senator's office to talk about different concerns that we have. So it looks different depending on what the concern is. So that's a piece of what I do as well. And then at a local level, working with our ambassadors, we have youth ambassadors and we have different ambassadors out in the community who are just spreading the word about mental health awareness, stigma reduction, encouraging other people to fight for good mental health policy, and to make sure that people know what resources exist in the community, where they can go for help and different things like that. So that in a nutshell is what I do.
And for those who haven't met Trisha, she is like a wealth of knowledge. It seems like she knows everything there is about anything that's going on in the world. And sometimes I try to just stand next to her so I can osmosis some of this information in, so I look like I know what's going on in the world. Don't get me wrong.
Way too much credit.
I read the news and I try to keep up to date, but there's no comparison with Trisha. I want to drive this back to kind of what your passion is and why you really got into this field. I know that you talked about how you wanted to work with kids and you wanted to work in schools, but could you give me a little more information on the mental health aspect and maybe the social work aspect?
Absolutely. So I started college as an education major, and I was going to be a history teacher and change the world and all those good things.
As a history teacher?
As a history teacher. And then I decided I didn't totally love the education program and the aspects of teaching and things like that. Also, it's really hard to become a high school history teacher. And I decided that I was going to go into something else that I could still work in schools, but maybe not teach. And that's not like shout out to all the teachers out there who are doing all of the things every day and helping kids learn. But I knew it wasn't for me. So I went to my academic advisor, and I was at Whitewater, and I said, hey, I know I want to work in schools. I know that I don't want to teach, but what else can I do? And she's like, well, you could be a guidance counselor. You could be a school social worker. You could, all these different things. So I spent the first semester of my sophomore year then just taking all of the different 101 classes, and I realized that social work was the one class where I actually wanted to do the reading and do the homework. And it was like the class that I actually loved going to and didn't ever want to miss it.
Shout out for anybody who's in college. You don't have to know what you want to do. You just have to find the class that you hate the least.
100%. And I loved that class, and I loved the program. The social work program at Whitewater is just amazing. So I was like, okay, I think social work is it for me, and started taking more of the higher level social work classes. And I ended up majoring in social work, minoring in sociology. And because I love learning about people and what makes people tick and how everyone kind of works together, like the, sociology aspect of things. So loved it. And then I realized that I probably wanted to go to grad school so that I could do either, to become a school counselor, to be a school social worker, things like that. So I took a year off in between college and getting my master's, which is totally okay for anyone to do, just to make sure that you are ready to go and it's what you want to do. Or if you just want to take a gap year, that's fine too. So I went to UW-M and I was there for a year. Then I had this kind of weird moment where I thought maybe I do actually want to be a teacher. So I went back for a semester to the local UW extension, did another semester of teaching, and realized once and for all, like, this is not going to be for me. Went back to UWM, finally got my master's, and I did some placements with schools within MPS and some of the charter schools around Milwaukee. So I was there for a couple of years working within some of those schools. Loved my time there, but also it still didn't have that level of, being kind of like on the ground, speaking with students, helping with the connection to resources and things like that. And I knew I really loved school social work, but just wanted like something that I could kind of dig a little deeper. Mm-hmm. So I actually ended up getting hired by MPS, and I turned the role down, and my mother was very terrified. So shout out to my mom for maintaining trust in me that I knew what I was doing with my life. But then, I moved back to Sheboygan and got a job working with kids with autism, which I really loved. And I loved being able to work with the schools and work with the kids within their systems to get them all the support that they needed. And I had so many amazing kids that I worked with. But it was still kind of missing that overall focus on mental health, which has always kind of been my passion, just helping people who needed that extra support. So, I ended up just, like I mentioned, all of a sudden, basically on accident, finding a Facebook post. And my now husband was with me at the time. And I remember, I smacked him in the arm and was like, look at this job. This is the job for me. And he was like, okay, go for it. So, and I feel like this is the perfect blend, because I get to work with schools. I get to work with businesses. I get to work with different community organizations. I get to help people learn about mental health. I get to help people find the resources that they need. I get to help support people in recovery and in, continued support and things like that. So it's just, I love what I do. I love coming to work every day. I love the people that I work with. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I find that's very similar to kind of what my story is. And I don't think anyone who works here has had a very linear path to this.
I don't think anyone who works at any nonprofit has had a linear path to get to where they are.
I mean, we have a corporate come nonprofit. I thought I was going to be a counselor, a mental health counselor. Before that, I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. Before that, I thought I was going to be a jazz guitar performer. And that didn't turn out. But I want to dive into some of the public education aspect of this work, and specifically not the MCI or the MES, the Mindful Classroom Initiative or the Mindful Education Series, but more around that general mental health, because this is a period of time that we're seeing just an explosion of awareness around mental health, but also we're seeing an explosion in just mental illness.
Yeah. So we have the before stage 4 philosophy that we utilize within Mental Health America. And this really comes from our national office. So MHA Lakeshore is an affiliate of the National Mental Health America organization that's based out in the Washington, D.C. area. But the before stage 4 philosophy really looks at if someone is struggling with a physical health condition, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, a broken arm, whatever it might be, you're not going to wait until you're in stage 4 of that process when it's chronic and debilitating and things like that. But people do that with their mental health. They don't go and get the help that they need as soon as they realize something is wrong. If someone is, having trouble breathing on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to be like, well, let's just wait and see if this gets better. It's going to be like, I'm having trouble breathing. I'm going to go to the doctor. And people, when they are first struggling with mental illness, they might think, oh, this is a really stressful time for me. So once I get through this period of time, then things will get better. Or I'm really sad about whatever thing might be going on in my life, and I'm just going to wait and see. So it's kind of this wait and see attitude. There's also a lot of people out there who just don't think that mental illness is a real and actual thing sometimes. There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what is anxiety, what is depression, what is bipolar disorder, what is schizoaffective disorder, those kinds of things. So I think that there's just a lot of unknowns for a lot of people. It's something that has been stigmatized forever in our country and across the world. And I think it's something that is still really stigmatized, even though there has been some progress made. So really our education program has kind of tasked itself with, what sort of knowledge can we provide people? Can we share, here are the signs and symptoms of mental illness. Here are the things to look out for. Here's what you can be, what you should be concerned about. Here are some things that are maybe like typical normal things. Like if you lose somebody close to you, obviously you're going to be sad for a period of time. But if you don't have any sort of, triggering stimulus that has happened in your life to make you feel sad for an extended period of time, or if your stress is starting to turn into something that is a level that is having an impact on your everyday life, and you're starting to avoid certain activities, or you're starting to, have physical symptoms of your stress and your anxiety, that's when we start to get concerned. And then, providing people with that information, what should they be looking out for? Providing people with information on where they can then go to get that help. And then also helping people to recognize some of the stigma and to reduce some of that stigma, because we know based on a lot of the research that's out there, it's not enough just to educate people about mental health. And sometimes, according to some studies too, the more people know about mental health, the more stigmatized they can actually become. So to be able to pair up, here is the knowledge you need to have. Let's recognize some of our own biases and some of the things we think about mental health and mental illness. And then let's move forward and make sure that we are supporting ourselves, we're supporting each other, and we're supporting our community as a whole. Because we know that when people know how to reach out for help and they feel comfortable reaching out for help, that our community is going to be in a much better place. People are going to get the help for those symptoms that they have before they become stage 4 crisis situations.
Absolutely. And you've been involved in this role for around 6 years now. I think 6.5.
It's been like exactly 6.
6 years now?
Yeah, I think I was hired like mid-June of 2016 and started like in the 20s of June.
So I feel like in the past 6 years, there's been a huge shift in how mental illness and mental health is viewed. Obviously, there's still a lot of stigma behind it, but I kind of wanted to get your background and what does this shift look like? How has the landscape changed over these last 6 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a huge amount of credit goes to the young people in our community. I think that even compared to when I started 6 years ago, young people are way more vocal about, I'll share something in a class and say, such and such about anxiety. And there's, always a kid who's like, that's exactly what my therapist says. Or, I go to therapy, or, yeah, I struggle with depression and this is exactly what mine looks like. The kids are just able to share what they're feeling, what they're doing. It's become, I think, less taboo to talk about, I go to therapy, or I have struggled with my mental health and things like that. And I think that one of the biggest pieces of stigma reduction is when you have those people who are comfortable sharing their stories, to actually put a real life person behind it, to say, I'm someone who struggled with anxiety. I'm someone who struggled with depression, or whatever they may have struggled with, because then it makes it real to people. Because I think sometimes people have this misconception about mental illness that, someone who struggles with a mental illness is different, is like other than, someone who's kind of on the fringes of society, someone who is more violent, someone, all these different things that we know are not true. So to be able to kind of put real faces to it, and to be able to educate young people about their mental health, so that they don't have those feelings of like, well, there's something wrong with me. So I think being able to get away from that and to talk about how mental illness is so incredibly common, how at any given time, about 20% of our population in this country has a diagnosable mental health condition. Just to know that it's us, it's our family members, it's our friends, the people we work with, the people we interact with on a daily basis, like all of the people that we come into contact with in some way, shape, or form have likely been affected by mental illness. So being able to share those stories and to just say, like, the whole phrase of it's okay to not be okay. Like, we need to get that out there more.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, though, too, like there's been in recent years kind of the shift of like, well, we shouldn't teach kids about mental health conditions because then, you know, talking about mental illness will give somebody a mental illness. Like, that is also not true. You know, like we would never do that with something like cancer or heart disease. Like, oh my gosh, let's not talk about it because then, you know, like, I mean, it's just mind blowing. So being able to, like, I really come at it from the lens of like, we're out here teaching kids and teaching the community about mental illness so that people know what to expect. Like what, you know, what is typical? What is something that I should be concerned about? And then where can I go if I need help? Just like we would for any other physical health condition. You know, you learn about some of the symptoms. If you have like a weird mole on your arm, you're going to go and get it checked out from a dermatologist because that is what you know about skin cancer.
And if you don't, please, everybody at home who has a weird mole on their arm, please go see a dermatologist.
Exactly. So it's not like, you know, talking about skin cancer is going to give you skin cancer. It's going to be like, hey, I have this awareness now and I know what to do should I get a goofy thing. Just like, as an example.
I feel like that's an aspect of mental illness that is deeply misinformed in the public, that mental illness is a completely social factor. I find a lot of people who talk about mental illness and maybe they do have a mental illness themselves and saying that, well, I didn't have anything in my life that makes me like feel like I should have a mental illness, or that their life is at a certain point that they should be somehow immune to mental illness. And that misinformation about what causes mental illness is that it's just a social factor is one piece of misinformation I feel is very pervasive in the public.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know, I mean, there's not ever one like set cause of why somebody develops a mental illness. We know that genes play a factor in a huge way. If you have a family member with a mental illness, it ups your chances a little bit. But we also know the environment that people are in, how much trauma they've experienced, what their lifestyle looks like. So there's so many different factors that play into it. Biochemistry. Yeah. I mean, there's not any sort of rhyme or reason to it. It's just that some people end up developing a mental illness at some point, and that it just, you know, just like any other organ in your body, if you get a clogged artery, you need to go and see a cardiologist. If your pancreas doesn't make insulin in the way it's supposed to, you get diabetes. If your brain gets sick, you might end up with a mental illness. So it's just like any other organ in your body. Not to oversimplify it, but I mean, essentially that's what's happening. Your brain can get sick just like any other part of your body can. So knowing the signs and symptoms to look out for and knowing where you can go for help is really, you know, the biggest piece that I like to put out there, because I think prevention and education are two of our biggest tools that we have in helping people who struggle with mental illness.
Could you talk about some of the specific stigmas about mental health and how these stigmas perpetuate these kind of discriminatory practices within our communities?
Yes, I think like one of the biggest ones is that people have the misconception that people who have mental illness are violent. And in reality, people who have mental illness are more than 4 times as likely to be victims of violence than people who are not mentally ill. I think that there's a lot of, and just given kind of current events and things like that, you know, people who commit crimes are mentally ill. Like sometimes there's just bad people, and bad people does not equal people with mental illness. There are, I mean, if you think about the fact that at any given time, 20% of our population has a diagnosable mental illness. Like there are people who are out there like running companies, being athletes every weekend. They're like, it's like there are people who are out there doing real things that we don't really know the struggles that people are facing. And people who have mental illness look like everybody else. You can't tell just by looking at somebody if they have a mental illness or not.
Some of the highest achievers in history have been people that struggle deeply with mental illness.
Yeah. I think, too, another huge stigmatizing piece of mental illness is the fact that, like, people equate it with there's something wrong with me. Like, if I'm struggling and I can't help myself through this situation, there's something wrong with like who I am. And I think like even, you know, myself. So after I had my son in 2017 and I was working at MHA and had been working here for almost 2 years, I was struggling with postpartum depression. And like I myself could not recognize it. And finally my husband was like, hey, you know, I think there's something going on here. So I kind of took that step back and was like, yeah, like this is probably PPD. But like I live in this world all of the time. Like I knew all the signs, I knew all the symptoms, I knew the things to look out for, but still kind of being in that like, no, like this is just, you know, I'm stressed because I'm a new mom and I've got so much stuff going on. But even, you know, like looking at like our own internalized kind of stigma of like thinking like, oh, because I have PPD now, like this means I'm like not as good of a mom. Like, no, it means that I have a chemical imbalance in my body and maybe I take a little bit of sertraline and I feel better. And again, not to oversimplify, but I mean, you know, essentially like we all have our own biases when it comes to mental health and we need to kind of recognize what those are. Like, you know, take that step back and think, even if you are someone who struggles with a mental illness, like what are your viewpoints on mental illness? Because for me, it was like this kind of like, you know, oh no, like I don't have postpartum depression. And then, you know, taking that step back and being like, yes, I do. And I need to go and talk to someone about this. Because then getting the right support makes you feel better and you're able to better meet the challenges that you have in life. And just because I had PPD doesn't mean I was a bad mom, but I became a better mom once I got treatment for it. So,
and just acknowledging it.
And just acknowledging like this is, you know, and to not be ashamed. Like if you are someone who is struggling and you think like, oh, what are people going to think of me? You know, I don't want to tell anybody about this. Like, no, it's a thing that a lot more people are dealing with than I think we even understand.
There's a few different aspects that I wanted to come back in everything that you just said. One of which is the nature that mental illness isn't something that is seen as a diagnosis, but as the behaviors that are the symptoms of that diagnosis. And I feel that aspect of it tends to make it very hard for people to accept they have a mental illness because we can attribute our behaviors to so many different aspects of our life. And the idea that we're just stressed or we're just overworked or burnt out, and the cause of our feelings of depression and just feelings of persistent sadness is because of our work situation or our home situation, not because we have a mental illness.
Yeah.
A lot of times you may have a mental illness because of your life situations. And another aspect is because you can't see it, it's hard to separate who I am versus what is the mental illness. And that blurred line between personality and what is affecting me mentally becomes something that is very difficult for those around us to really differentiate. But even ourselves being the people who are experiencing mental illness, that also becomes very difficult for us.
100%. And I think too, you know, for ourselves and then for those of us who are caretakers of people with mental illness too, because it's, you know, you're taking care of somebody, you want them to be living their best life possible. And sometimes certain aspects of their mental illness might hinder their progress with feeling better, getting better, being able to be, you know, live a more kind of typical productive life. And that, you know, as a caretaker, like you might get frustrated and that's okay because you're dealing with a frustrating situation, but then being able to remember to kind of take that step back and to know, you know, this is what is happening to this person. This is not like who this person is. So
one of the most aha moments for me is I'm somebody that just struggled with depression myself. And I was reading an article that talked about how people with depression, the areas of their brain that sometimes are deeply affected by depression are the areas of memory and learning. And so this manifests in people who struggle deeply with depression, not learning from their mistakes and going back into the same kind of situations that previously hurt them or caused them to suffer, and then not learning from that mistake. So it just becomes a repetition of these mistakes that an individual doesn't learn from. And for me, that was like separation between, oh, I'm just somebody that puts myself in these positions over and over again, versus this is a symptom of what I'm going through.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So I want to jump to the mindfulness portion.
Yeah.
We have two really big mindfulness programs that we do here at MHA Lakeshore, and that's the Mindful Classroom Initiative and the Mindful Educator Series.
Yes.
So could you give me a little dive?
Sure.
Delve into those two aspects.
So our Mindful Classroom Initiative is kind of like our overarching mindfulness program. And then that really is split into those two pieces of the student series where we go in, we're working with students for 10 weeks, and our educator series where we are training educators in the mindfulness curricula. So we started the mindfulness program in the fall of 2016 with those initial classrooms across the county. And we saw a lot of growth with students, a lot of students who were able to better recognize their emotions, a lot of students who were able to focus better in the classroom, who were learning those coping skills and being able to deal with tough situations. As we continued to grow that program over that first year, we started to think about what can we do? So we're working with students, but what can we do to also kind of have that top-down approach of what can we do to work with educators and the people who are working with these kids, so that, it's not just us coming in and sharing this information, but the educators are also able to take some of this information and utilize it as well, even when we're not there, creating kind of an overall culture shift within the school. So the very first educator series that was done was in the summer of 2017, going into the 2017-2018 school year. And it was done with some educators at Grant Elementary School, who are one of our first partners and are still just doing amazing things within their building. But they had us come in and do an educator series where we, really did this kind of immersive workshop with them on how can you utilize these skills, build these skills up in your students. And, mindfulness, I think sometimes has this kind of scary, we're sitting and meditating for long periods of time, or
we're going to become lifeless blobs.
We're going to become lifeless blobs and the whole, unicorns and rainbows and nonstop magic that comes from mindfulness, and kind of some of those preconceived notions when, really the mindfulness that we teach is this is about paying attention. This is about being present, noticing what's happening around you, noticing what's happening within you, knowing, here's what I'm thinking as I'm thinking it. Here's what I'm feeling as I'm actually feeling it, and acknowledging the different things that we're going through, and being able to do that to not only work with students, but to also have that knowledge for yourself, because we know that teachers are not just teachers. They wear 80 different hats during the day as well. So being able to handle, the things that they have to do every day, but also still find some ways to acknowledge themselves and acknowledge their feelings and take care of themselves and utilize these practices for their own well-being as well. So we've really shifted a lot into working with educators in order to really drive home some of those skills, because we're seeing a lot of success with our 10-week program, but we also, we're a nonprofit, we're a small team. We don't have the capability to be everywhere. I wish we could be in every school and every classroom, but we don't always have that capability. So being able to really get it into the hands of educators who then, every educator can impact the lives of dozens of students. So we have had a lot of success with that as well, and are slowly kind of growing that program, and have really gotten it to be something that we're pretty proud of.
I find that there's a duality within our community around mindfulness, and there's a group of people that really, really love it, and they swear by it, and they think it's the greatest thing in the world, and it's the cure-all. And there's a group of people that
are scared of
mindfulness and people sitting cross-legged. And so I want to have a bit of a conversation about, we do a mindfulness presentation through MHA Lakeshore. One of the things that we love to show is a video by Dan Harris. And if anybody's never heard of Dan Harris, he wrote a wonderful book called 10% Happier. And he's got a really cool story about how he got into mindfulness. But one of the things that he says about mindfulness is, he sums it up as, mindfulness is the ability to know what is going on within your head or around you at any given moment without being carried away from it. And I really love this kind of synthesis of mindfulness because it peels back a lot of the stigma around mindfulness. And for anybody that is still a little confused by that definition, it's like when you're going through your everyday life and you have a thought about maybe something that you have to do later that day, or maybe it's something that happened earlier to you, we tend to get very carried away with that. If we have a thought about something we need to do later in the day, we tend to follow that train of thought all the way through until maybe a minute or 2 minutes now we're thinking about what our schedule is going to be for the next 3 weeks. And so this is that getting lost in thought, being carried away by that thought. And mindfulness really is just being able to be aware of the thought. What do I have to do later today? Without having to go down that train of thought. You can still choose to go down that train of thought if it's something that is helpful for you or you feel like it needs to happen. But you have a choice whether or not to follow that train of thought without being just compulsively kind of pushed into that thought process. And one of the things that I love that we show, it's a poster that we give to classrooms, is kind of the stimulus reactivity versus the stimulus response that we give out. And it's just a diagram, a very simple diagram. And on one side, you have without mindfulness. And there's a stimulus, something that triggers a thought process. Maybe it's something stressful. And without mindfulness, you just react. It's a pure reaction. You don't think about it. It's just your response that you are conditioned to have. And with mindfulness, we have that stimulus or stressor. And then we have that pause because we have that mindfulness. We can see the thought. We have a second to think about it. And instead of having a reaction, that pause allows us to have a response. And that difference between reaction and response is something, having a conditioned reaction, it's automatic. We don't think about it. It's oftentimes not the best way that we could handle a situation. If anybody has had a very stressful environment and maybe a coworker comes and asks you to do something for the 7th time today, and it's the same thing that they asked you to do the last 3 times, and you're telling them how they can do it, but they just don't understand it. A lot of times the reaction aspect isn't going to be too flattering on your part. It's not going to be showing the best that you have to offer. But if you are able to take that mindful approach, that pause, we're able to respond in the most effective manner. Gives you a second to think about, what does this situation really call for? And that's something that I just love about Dan Harris's kind of synthesis of mindfulness, is I feel like he really makes that distinction clear, that it's not we're becoming void people that have no personality and don't like or dislike anything. It's really about allowing yourself to take that extra pause and decide the way that you want to respond to a situation. And
being mindful and remembering that you have that choice. You can choose how you respond in different situations. 100%. I love that video. I love his whole mindset about mindfulness and how, it's really being more thoughtful about the things that we do every day. And I think that so many of us are already doing things that are mindful. We just don't understand that it's mindfulness. So if you have ever gone for a walk in a garden and taken the time to look at how beautiful the plants are, what the garden smelled like, or taken time to really stop and enjoy a cup of coffee or tea in the morning, those are all ways that we can be mindful every day. one of the funny examples that I like to share is like for anyone who's ever gotten their nails done and then spent the next hour like carefully picking things up or making sure that they weren't going to do anything to, you know, nick their nails. Like that's mindfulness. You're paying attention on purpose to what you're doing in that moment. So
it's kind of like self-awareness.
It's self-awareness.
By moment.
Yeah. And, you know, those times where we've all had moments where we've like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that or done that. But like, do we need to all of a sudden be thinking about it at 3 a.m.? Like, why did I say that weird thing to my coworker? Oh my gosh, I'm going to reflect on this for the rest of my life. Like, no, you don't have to. You can think about it and, you know, okay, yeah, my coworker probably heard me say it, but like, are they fixating on this as much as I am? Probably not. I can let this go, maybe mention something to them in the morning and apologize for what I said. But like, for now, I'm going back to sleep because it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I don't need to think about this right now. So really just breaking down mindfulness into that idea that like, this is not about some like standing on top of a mountain in a beautiful white linen outfit and being, you know, like I'm in this perfect moment of Zen. Like, no, mindfulness is, okay, this thing happened. I'm going to give myself a quick break, take a, you know, drink of water, take a breath, whatever it might be. And then I'm going to respond. I'm going to be thoughtful about my approach to things.
I feel a lot of times that people have this idea that mindfulness and meditation is a way of getting away from the world when it's absolutely the opposite. Is it a way to engage with the world in a more full and unfiltered way?
I'm not good at mindfulness because I can't clear my mind and I have so many thoughts when I try to meditate. Good, because you're human.
Yeah,
like,
that is mindfulness.
That's mindfulness.
Knowing that you are having so many thoughts that it's hard to keep your head clear, that's a part of mindfulness.
100%. I think a lot of times people think like in order to be mindful, I need to be this like completely zoned out blob who is just like, you know, completely disconnected from the world. Mindfulness helps us connect better to the world around us. So if you try to sit quietly and do a meditation and you're focusing on your breath and you keep thinking, you know, having certain thoughts pop up, acknowledge them, be mindful and think about, okay, what am I thinking about right now? Oh, okay, this is I'm thinking about planning something or working on something that I need to have done for this week. That's a planning thought. I'm going to worry about that later and come back and focus on my breath. So just because you have thoughts that pop up does not mean you're not being mindful. It means that those thoughts are popping up. You can pay attention to them, let them go, come back to them, or, you know, come back to them if you need to. But sometimes a lot of the thoughts we have are just things that we can let go, not things that we need to overfocus on. So
I want to tie this into why we do it at Mental Health America Lakeshore. And a lot of the reason that we do it is, one, it aids in our social and emotional learning, which is a huge aspect of the MCI as we go into classrooms and we're trying to teach the self-awareness of our social and emotional aspects of our lives. So it's like going in and asking kids how they feel when they get upset and having that kind of self-awareness of what they feel when they get upset and trying to get them to reflect on it and maybe respond instead of react in a different way. I think one of my favorite responses I ever got is I asked the classroom, what do they feel when their sibling is really annoying them? And the sweetest looking girl in the class raised her hand and I called on her. And she said, I feel like I want to punch my brother in the face. And that is a wonderful.
And I was in the back of the classroom trying not to laugh.
I was trying not to laugh as well. I had to put on my education hat and try to say, no, maybe that's not the best response we can have. But essentially, that's where mindfulness is most useful.
And kids feel that way, you know, like kids, because a lot of times they don't have the like life experience to know that there are better ways for me to handle situations. So when I do feel like punching my brother, what is something I can do instead?
Absolutely. And so this all kind of connects to, I'm going to get into a little bit of neuroscience and I'll try to keep it so I understand it myself and everybody listening can understand it. But basically, the premise of it is this idea of neuroplasticity, which is the idea that our brains change. Just like we can learn things, we can unlearn things, and our brain changes in that way. And there's physical changes within the brain when we learn something or we unlearn something. One of my favorite quotes is by Sam Harris, and he's a neuroscientist, and he says, most of us are genuinely unaware that we have the ability to change our brain, that our brain can adapt to different ways that we want our brain to behave. And I love this idea because most people think that, oh, that's just who I am. Like, I behave this way in a situation because that's just who I am. No, that's maybe the way that you respond to this kind of situation right now. But through effort, through mindfulness, you can change the way that your brain actually processes things. And you can change different areas of the brain that regulate mood, that regulate your stress response, that can help prevent mental illnesses and alleviate the symptoms of certain mental illnesses. And there's been studies that have been done on things like the mindfulness-based stress reduction by John Kabat-Zinn, who we love here, that actually show that areas in the hippocampus actually can increase the gray matter, which improves emotion regulation and prevent mental illnesses such as major depressive disorder and PTSD. So that just goes to show that it's not something that you just practice and there's no physical manifestation of it, but this is something that actually changes your brain. And we have a growing body of research on how effective it is in people in changing their responses.
And we see it happen. We see it happen with kids. We see it happen with educators in the community that when they learn some of these skills, and it's based in, we want to help kids focus in the classroom. Paying attention on purpose in the present moment means I'm going to pay attention to what my teacher is saying rather than, zoning out and daydreaming about something. But then when we start to get into, paying attention on purpose to what we're feeling and noticing our emotions, a kid who maybe now has the ability to, hey, I notice that I'm stressed and that maybe at this point in time, I need to take a quick break. I need to, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, let my teacher know that I'm starting to kind of, get worked up, whatever it might be. That then avoids deeper conflict with themselves, with the people around them. Mm-hmm. Teachers who are able to recognize moments when they're overwhelmed and stressed and able to take that step back when they're able to kind of work through it and think about ways that we can give ourselves that pause to better handle the situations that we're a part of. Because then we do have that better relationship with ourselves, the better relationship with the people around us, and we're able to kind of interact better and have better connection.
For the purpose of time, we're running a little behind, as I usually am in conversations. There's so many tangents that I love to jump on and so many different thought trains that I love to jump on. But I want to shift a little into advocacy. This is another major aspect of your role. And I feel like when people hear the term advocacy, there's quite a bit of confusion in what advocacy looks like and what somebody has to do to be an activist. This is kind of the misunderstanding that advocates all look like Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement or Susan B. Anthony with women's rights. And I feel like this discourages a lot of people away from advocacy and leads to kind of a culture where advocacy becomes too big of an idea. It becomes too big of a undertaking for somebody to get involved.
Yes. So I do think, there's that, misconception that one person can't make a difference. But in reality, I think anything that gets changed, it starts by one person saying, hey, this is not right. And then it kind of, the movement builds based on that. And I think when it comes to advocacy and mental health advocacy, if somebody out there is willing to share a story of how bad mental health policy has impacted themselves or their family, and to say, hey, elected official, this is something that my family went through. I want to make sure other families don't go through this. What can we do to work together to change this law, to create a law, whatever it might be? And that is how things get done. And I think politics has gotten so disarrayed in our country as well. that people just feel so disconnected from the people who are leading them. But we always need to remember and to sometimes remind politicians, like, we elected you and you work for us. And here is the issue that I'm facing. And I want to meet with you to do something about it. And you don't have to be afraid to like send an email to somebody and say, hey, I am one of your constituents. This is where I live. This is the issue that is important to me. Can we set up a meeting to talk about this? I mean, you're not necessarily going to meet with like that politician. Typically, if I am having a meeting with a certain legislator's office, I'm typically meeting with one of their staffers, but you're still sharing that information and you're still talking to that individual, and all of that information is getting shared. And there are a lot of people out there, even if it's not somebody who represents you in the community that you live in, chances are there's a politician or elected official out there that has the same views as you on certain, mental health topics or whatever it might be, to say, hey, I know that you don't represent me, but, what information might you be able to give me on, such and such policy? I think there is kind of this notion that like politicians are so like separated from the people who represent them, but they're not. Like, they get things done because people call them.
They're not supposed to be removed.
No, and they're not supposed to be. I mean, things get done because one person and then 2 people and then 50 people and then 100 people say, hey, this is what's going on and this is what needs to change. So don't be afraid to get involved. And I think sometimes too, it's so easy to be connected if you know where to look. There are different advocacy outlets out there. So for example, Mental Health America, you can get connected into their advocacy network and they'll just send you an email and say, hey, here are the mental health laws that are coming up in the agenda for Congress in the next few weeks. Email your legislators and say, hey, we want good mental health laws. We want you to focus on these efforts. Here are the things we're asking for. You click on email your senator and like the template will pop up and you just enter in, my name is Trisha Erpelding and I live in Sheboygan and here's what I'm proposing. So it'll give you that whole thing. It's as easy as just like clicking a button and entering your name. Advocacy can be so easy. I think advocating for mental health can be difficult because a lot of times, again, the stigma, people are afraid to share their stories. But if you are willing to be that voice and to say, even if it's not sharing your story, even if it's just, hey, things are really unfair for people with mental illness right now. I want to do something about it. I want to educate more people. I want to talk about mental illness and make it be a normal part of things that we address in the workplace. I want to have good workplace policies on mental health. Being able to advocate in the community that you're comfortable in, whether it's your workplace, whether it's a community organization that you're a part of, to just be that voice to say, hey, mental health is something that we all have. And sometimes some of us are mentally healthier than others. And we need to really just support each other and do the things that are best for each other, which is more of that kind of like local, the MHA ambassadors and things like that. So we've seen so many great things come out of the ambassadors since the program started, and especially our youth ambassador program. Kids who have taken it upon themselves to address mental health concerns within their school buildings, having information nights, starting websites, having, putting posters up in their schools, different resources that they're sharing with each other. It's been awesome to see that grow.
Absolutely. And that touches on an aspect that I wanted to speak on, is that advocacy is a very wide spectrum. We tend to think of it as it's all under the state and national legislature and politics, where advocacy can be talking to your supervisor at work saying, hey, I would really like to see maybe this change in the way that our company talks about mental health, or some of the resources that we have as a company for mental health. That's being an advocate in the workplace. We have advocates in schools, like you mentioned. You can be an advocate in any area. You can be an advocate in your family. If somebody is talking about mental health in a very stigmatized way, educate. Don't berate them, or don't
just take the opportunity to say, hey, I noticed you said this. I'm wondering why you're feeling that way, and, have that conversation and have those open lines of communication. Like you said, not berating people. Yeah. Like, that's not the right way to say it, but having, more of that conversation of like, I wonder why you feel that way. And keeping things open and trying to just inform people on the best way to do things. And then when you're actually able to make those changes, like, a bill becomes a law or a policy gets changed in your workplace, like that feeling of like, oh, I made a difference. Because people do make a difference. One person can make a difference. A group of 1,000 people can make a difference. So don't feel like your efforts are ever going to go to waste because you're putting your voice out there and standing up for something that you believe in.
Absolutely. So upon wrapping this conversation up, what is some of your best advice for audience members? How can audience members get involved in some of your work?
I would say like the best advice that I have is to be knowledgeable about mental health, to be supportive of yourself and the people around you, because you never know what somebody is struggling with. So to just, be a good human and support the people around you in whatever way you're able to. And I would say for anyone who wants to get into contact with me, you can email me, you can give me a phone call, whatever works best. So.
Well, thank you so much, Trisha, for taking the time to chat with me. And I hope that everybody enjoyed this conversation. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Think on This podcast with MHA Lakeshore. If you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe to our feed to be notified about the latest episodes. If you are interested in MHA Lakeshore and want to follow our work, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and our webpage, all of which are linked in our bio. Additionally, you will find a link to a form where you can leave any feedback or suggestions for us. We would love to hear what you have to say, so please reach out. Lastly, if you found that this content was of value to you, you can donate to us on our webpage by clicking on the yellow donate button in the upper right-hand corner. As a nonprofit, we rely primarily on grants and donations to operate, and every donation allows us to have a greater impact. By donating, you are supporting our vision of mentally healthy communities where all individuals thrive.